So good morning all. Thank you so much for joining this panel on Beyond Payments to the Consumer Ecosystem. My name is Mual. I'm the publisher of the Paypers, a global leading source of news, research and analysis for professionals in payments, commerce and fintech. And I'm delighted to moderate today's panel on developments in the consumer ecosystem in both growth markets and mature markets, and how payments and beyond payments finance ties into this. So I would like to ask the panelists to give a very brief self-introduction. So Toby.
Hello, good morning. Well, it's a little bit tweaked, but I'm Toby Otsuka. Just call me Toby, T-O-B-Y. I'm CEO of Rakuten Europe, and also heading up the Rakuten Europe Bank, which is a full license bank in Europe, based in Luxembourg. I've been in the bank. Well, I've been in the banking industry for nearly 30 years, but now I'm doing slightly different things from what I've been doing, because I need to oversee all the Rakuten businesses across European countries. As you may or may not know, Rakuten is it started with e-commerce, so it's a kind of Japanese Amazon. But we diversified our business portfolio pretty much. So now nearly a half of our EBITDA, comes from fintech businesses, and also we have OTTs, we have a lot of things, including professional sports and adjacent areas like online travel and so on and so forth.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you. So Gilles, could you please?
Yes, good morning everyone. Gilles Grapinet. I'm the chairman and CEO of Worldline. Worldline is the largest European payment services provider. We are at the same time the largest financial processor for banks. We support 300 plus banks for issuing payment means, payment methods, managing anything from account-to-account payment systems to card-based payments or very strong authentication features like requested by PSD2. And we are also the largest merchant services provider in Europe. We have ourselves direct relationship with 500,000 or so merchants across Europe as frontline acquirers for them, and also a very large global online collector beyond Europe for very large e-com merchants. And this is a company that has been spinned off from the former Atos group a few years back. We are now a listed independent company, listed in Euronext, 12,000 people, 2.4 billion euros of turnover.
Okay, thanks. Laurent.
Hello, hi everyone. So my name is Laurent. I'm the CEO of PayU, which is a payments company, doing three things really. The first one is we provide payment services focusing only on high-growth markets. Some people will say emerging markets, but India, Southeast Asia, Africa, LATAM, Central Eastern Europe. So nothing to do with Western Europe, the US, only emerging markets, because this is where you will find the top 10 economies 10 years from now. The second thing is that's beyond payments, right? So this is a company morphing from payments into broader financial services. We truly believe that payments, it's an interesting business. There is actually not that much innovation, and you need to use that to build something bigger with this. So we can elaborate on that. And the third one is we are part of Prosus, which is the biggest technology company in Europe. It's a $100 billion market cap out of Amsterdam. And we are one of the biggest strategic investors in fintech. And again, we fund companies in all the emerging markets, so all the different startups trying to build an ecosystem around this.
Okay, all right. So now we're all acquainted. I would like to kick off the discussion with Toby. Rakuten basically built an all-inclusive consumer ecosystem in Japan. You're now also competing with Amazon. Can you elaborate a little bit on the width of your consumer ecosystem in Japan and how you defend it against Amazon? So how are you continue building value in this consumer ecosystem?
Okay, I try to be quick this time. We happened to start with the e-commerce, back in the year 1997. So in Japan, e-commerce has been the flagship business However, as I mentioned, now we have a huge huge business portfolio, including fintechs and everything. So, what we are trying to do is to not to beat Amazon in Japan or whatsoever. Well, of course, that's not bad, but rather, we would like to create ecosystem. In Japan, we have a membership program which has more than 100 million customers out of 125 million population. And also,
almost everyone in Japan.
Well, yeah, right.
Part of your loyalty.
Well, so it's a national brand, and the cross usage ratio is more than 70%, meaning that everyone, well, more than 70% of the people are using more than 2 services, of Rakuten ecosystem. And then the loyalty program we have is issuing approximately 2.5 billion US dollar equivalent point every single year. So it's really a good ecosystem working well. So going back to your point, that's what we ultimately aim.
Yeah.
And we would like to replicate this success to other parts of the world. Of course, the evolution of the ecosystem should differ from the one we had in Japan. So in Europe, we have a different approach. In Americas, we have a different approach. So yeah, the tricky point is how you define the optimal approach in each region in order to, again, create a sizable ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And talking about this replication of successful consumer ecosystem, Laurent, if you look into growth markets, the example that is often referred to is obviously from China, WeChat, now in Singapore, Grab. If you look into the replication of these models into other growth markets, what lessons can be learned, and how does payments tie into this?
Yeah, so as Prosus, we are the largest shareholder of Tencent, right? And so we work closely with them, when we look at investment, etc. And of course, I would love to have just, a simple recipe that you could replicate in the other markets. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like this. I think for me, just to boil it down, really, we really, make the contrast between China and India. On one end, you have these duopoly, right? 2 very large companies, one coming from an e-commerce background, Alibaba and Alipay, right? So transactional, really, enabling payments and then building something. On the other side, we have a WeChat, which is really, you guys probably use WhatsApp. You go to China, you will use WeChat, so a social network. Then, once you have the engagement, then you start layering, on top transactions and so on. The thing is that duopoly, each one, building its own ecosystem, you take this to India, you put billions of dollars, yet nothing happens. Because the biggest disruptor in India, it's actually the government. And the government, what has been done in India, and I've been in payments for many, many years, but what has been done is truly unique, because here, what is called the India Stack, it's a combination of Aadhaar, which is like a gigantic, database, fingerprints. Then you have this platform called UPI, which is basically a real-time, fast, bank payments, right? So it took 10 years in Europe to do it. They did it in 18 months, right? But this is fundamentally a completely open approach.
Yeah.
So we always say, the biggest disruptor in India is the government, because they're giving the platform and the tools to everybody, the startup, but Google or Amazon, right? And the second thing is they're making it so that there is actually little profits to be made unless you have scale and unless you have a game plan that goes beyond payments. So I think the lessons there is you have closed ecosystem versus complete open platforms. 2 countries, 1.5 billion, 1.3 billion people, so massive adoption, but the models are actually very different. And I think the battleground right now, we see it in Southeast Asia, where actually you see the 2 models, confronting each other.
Yeah. And if you look into the role of payment providers in these ecosystems, how do you see their role evolving?
So I think everybody is building an ecosystem, right? I think in these 2 days, everybody tell you I'm building an ecosystem. What it means for us is it has moved to the importance of data. We don't care so much about how many consumers you have, but how many consumer data sources and what is the information you get from all these consumers. So really trying to build a data platform that is agnostic and that you can get all the data platform, and that's the ecosystem, because you have to contribute data for your own benefit, but also for the benefits of the other companies. So that's one. And the second thing is fundamentally what we are investing and spending our time on is really everything around AI, and specifically machine learning, capabilities, because that's the only way then to really create value out of this ecosystem.
Gilles, talking about more mature markets, about Europe, where you primarily have your activities, what does it take for a payment provider in Europe to be part of a consumer ecosystem?
Well, as a matter of fact, I must say that I must stay very humble here, because the ones that are actually building consumers' ecosystems are the merchants. The real angle I have on this one is, of course, the angle of a payment services provider. How can we help? What payment can bring to this equation for a given brand to actually be in a position to shape a valuable value proposition to other merchant brands that they want to aggregate in their ecosystem, or to the consumers. So I want to be a bit granular, because as everything in payments sometimes, and I was listening to Ron a few minutes ago, Ron was saying, payment will become invisible. That's true, absolutely true. As consumer experience, I guess that in 10 years' time, we don't realize we're gonna pay. But the complexity behind will be anything but light to get there. So let's look at what it means concretely. First, I'm trading with a brand which is aggregated maybe 10 other merchants to give me an integrated value proposition in the ecosystem. I need to make frictionless payment. One transaction, and I get maybe 3 products and 2 services integrated. So of course, it talks about what type of interaction you've got at the point of sale. And I think the big news here is the Android POS, allowing sophisticated interaction versus the typical relatively dumb payment terminals we were having. So this is allowing already to set up sophisticated value proposition in the physical space of traditional brick and mortar merchants, being said that everyone is omnicommerce these days anyway. Apps allowing to do this payment once for every merchant. Then, how do you share the value of this single payment with all the participants in the ecosystem? Then we need to talk about clearing and settlement systems that are behind the scene, are going to allocate the value as per each of the contribution in the integrated customer value proposition. Relatively complex to do. Today, clearing and settlement were primarily marketplaces-related concept or banking-related concept. As a matter of fact, to build an ecosystem, you need to have a strong clearing and settlement capability in the middle. Third, you need to manage the real complexity of life. What happens if one of the 5 merchants is not delivering what has been promised? How do you manage chargebacks? How do you manage this particular dispute that is hidden behind one only transaction? This is what Worldline is doing for significant brands, which is actually to make the thing live, real, accepting the complexity of the payment ecosystem while we hide it from the consumer. So this is there that big payment companies need to support the build-up of ecosystem.
Yeah, you mentioned big payment companies, and we see in Europe a massive consolidation of these payment companies, and also to become relevant for these consumer ecosystems. If you look into the near future, let's say the next 5 years, how many players will there be left in Europe? Is there a place for 1 or 2? What's your take on this?
Well, just Worldline has made the European consolidation the center of its own strategy, because we must recognize that Europe is very late. It comes from the monetary fragmentation we were having, of course, before the euro. And since the euro, we can really scale the payment business at the side of the second largest continent and the second largest currency in the world still. So definitely, I anticipate that, like in the US, the end game for big payment services providers in Europe should be more or less 3 to 4 companies managing maybe 70–75% of the payment flows in Europe. This is also mandatory to support the build-up of this payment ecosystem, because you cannot offer to a customer, a given customer experience in France that you are not able to replicate in Belgium or in Germany or in Italy. I mean, ultimately, your marketing strategy has to be simple to understand. You cannot promise something in a country. If you go to the next country as a European citizen, all of a sudden, this does not work any longer.
Yeah.
So it's why I believe these rails that we are building in Europe are just also critical industrial ingredients to allow the merchants to bring their dreams in the high street and on the web. So it is really our commitment to the merchant community. Build what you want to build. We're going to be there with the technology, the innovation, and we're going to hide this complexity from everyone.
Yeah, Laurent, it's, you're more focusing on growth markets, but what is your take on that? How do you see this development in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, consolidation, I mean, just look, on the numbers over the past 2 or 3 years, right? I mean, it's never been a better time to be in the payments business. The multiples, at a time high, in terms of revenues and EBITDA. So then it's just a matter of capital allocation, right? If you are a big investor, where do you put your money? Personally, what we've seen is scale is still pretty much a very big driver in that industry. We believe you can't predict the future, but you can still make options, right? And we think it's still very likely that maybe there will be only one European company that has a global scale at the end of the day. And indeed, the necessity, of having all the back-end systems, et cetera, Europe is fantastic for this, right? I mean, in terms of regulation. But we believe at the end of the day, in that grand scheme of things, when you need truly to have global scale and the capital to invest, we believe it could be possible, you have a few big global companies, maybe one is just from Europe. Is that really important? Not so much. You will have to compete at the global scale. The second thing is, where is the capital gonna come from? At the end of the day, look who is funding right now, the later stage companies in Fintech. The money will come from Chinese investors, Asian investors as well. At least what we see for us, it's all Chinese money. It's also from Japan, actually, when it comes to credit, because everybody is looking for yield in Japan, right? I never see any European investors in that one having just the capacity to fund. So that's going to be a second element. And then the third thing, it's going to be like, well, where do you want to play in the payment space, which for us is payments gives you the right to build something else. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's always about that something else.
Which something else could be?
Credit and banking. That's what is coming for the consumer, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you look to a consumer ecosystem and Libra, Facebook definitely, with a consortium of companies started this Libra initiative. PayU is currently the only payment company left. MasterCard and Visa, they left. So it's PayU is now joining this initiative. Can you elaborate a little bit on why and what you see is the future of Libra? Is this the new consumer ecosystem in emerging markets or in growth markets, as you mentioned?
First, I can invite my colleagues to join, right, the Libra Association first, If you guys want to join, we can have a coffee. It's very simple. We were the very first, and yes, we are the only one for the moment.
For the moment, okay.
For the moment, everybody asks me, oh, why did these guys leave? I don't know, ask them. We are not a US company. We don't get scared, if we get a letter from a US senator. But the point is, new people are joining from the banking industry, from the payments industry. And the point is, why are you joining? Especially now, right? And the reality here is, again, in terms of option theory. Do you believe that cryptocurrencies in the current form are solving the problem? No. That's why regulators are comfortable with Bitcoin, because they see it's still a small thing. Who cares? Stablecoin, pushed by big consumer, companies like Uber, Spotify, or for that matter, Facebook, which are all part of the association, then people start thinking like, whoa, shit, this could have mass adoption. That's one. The second thing is, do you believe, that distributed ledgers, blockchain as it is, can scale to some of the usage? No. So do you need to build a new one? Yes. That's what actually the association is building. So you need 10 years, horizon. You put your money in it, right, if you believe in that, and you start building it. Then all the rest, just peripeties, who is joining, who is leaving, it's not what is truly important. Is this happening? Yes. And at the end of the day, I don't know if there is any regulator in that room. CBDCs, right? Central bank digital currencies have been around. The Bitcoin paper was 10 years ago, right? I've been around for a few years. Suddenly now, in the past 12 months, they've realized, we've got to do something. And it will happen. And it will happen starting from China, right? Digital yuan is coming, right? So on that one, that's a completely different way on how you build an ecosystem. This is probably, in terms of technology, much more radical than any payment system that we have. And in terms of business model, absolutely, completely different. You're not going to make money by managing transactions. You're going to make money with all the data that you have.
Talking about ecosystems in Europe, how could, and this is a question for Gilles, how could payments start being the beginning of a consumer ecosystem? We talked about the transport and mobility sector.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this one is really an interesting one because this is the value of payments. I was listening to Laurent. Laurent is right, as a matter of fact. Payment can help to free a potential that has been there for a decade, but that was not leveraged. And here, my point, particularly in Europe, is public transportation networks. Let's talk about your train companies or your metro companies or tramway operators, buses operators. Most of the time in Europe, these are publicly owned activities or publicly regulated activities somewhere by a transport authority. For decades, these companies have defined themselves as bringing a train in a train station at 8 a.m. and dropping the passengers at the next station at 8:15 or 8:30. Full stop. And you were buying a paper ticket to get this customer experience. Now these guys, they are realizing that dematerializing the ticketing system, bringing it as a convenient payment tool like open payment, I can get in the network, tapping my phone in NFC. When I get on board the bus, I have no need to buy any specific transportation ticket. I just take my normal payment method. I get in, I get out, done. Worldline is currently building such systems for very large cities in France and in Europe. We are currently building the new ticketing system for the Paris region, 12 million inhabitants. And the vision of the transport operator is if I can dematerialize all this ticketing stuff, I can propose a door-to-door experience. No longer you start with me at the station and you stop with me at the station. I am the manager of your mobility. Meaning that with the single tap, you can get the bus that is going to bring you to the station, the transportation with the train. At the station where you disembark, you can get the, let's say, the rent-a-bike, and you do the last mile with the bike. Then the clearing system spread the value between all these new participants in the door-to-door experience, even if these are 3 different companies or 5 tomorrow. But then comes the magic. Why shouldn't I propose also to book a menu at McDo, which is in the station, in the same journey? It will save me time. I will bypass the queue. Why shouldn't I propose also probably to rent a car at Europcar if I need to go outside the region of Paris? And this is coming so fast. And then you realize that if it is frictionless, if the back-end clearing system is robust enough, basically there is no limit in the value proposition that you can aggregate in a transportation journey. Keep in mind, we talk here about, in the Paris region, of 2.5 million daily interactions between the transportation authority and 2.5 million people that you know are going to be at that place at 8:15 and will go there at 8:45. What can you do with this piece of information if you open access to this data in an opt-in GDPR compliant system to merchants that want to take advantage of this information? Really, payment can free an entire new ecosystem around public transportation and literally revolutionize the public transportation concept itself.
And if you take the consumer perspective, because what I understood is this is basically for the Paris region, but if you're a consumer, one day you travel within Paris, on Saturday you want to go to Lyon or somewhere else in France. What is the vision on basically creating a broader ecosystem for traveling in a
well, maybe in 10 years' time, this various transportation authority can actually manage these less frequent interaction, because if you are in the public transportation network with high frequencies like metro or tramways, you know that there is a very high level of recurrence of your customer being there. But just for you to know, it happens that Lyon, it is us also. Dijon, it will be us. Marseille, I believe, hopefully it will be us. So Worldline technology will be actually supporting many of these cities. So connecting this platform one to each other once they are set up in the next 2-3 years, I think should be not a big technology problem. It should be a business discussion between transportation operators and what value for what type of consumers will be there.
Clear. Toby, if you look into Japan, I mean, I was fascinated by the transportation system. I've been in Tokyo 2 years ago. If you look into payments and this consumer ecosystem in transport, are there some interesting use cases from Japan or some learnings in how to build up this broader ecosystem?
Okay, we are not a transportation company, but well,
Rakuten has a...
Yeah, just one step back. Well, first and foremost, I think banks and payment companies shouldn't be put in the spotlight, because we are simply necessary evil. I'm afraid to say that, but that's a reality, I think. And we are simply trying to facilitate the movement of the value, which is the sort of collective consensus over value amongst people. So what I'm trying to say is payments should be everywhere, just like an air or water, and it should be frictionless. And we shouldn't be on the front end, but we should be in the hinder side of the story. I think in the Fintech conference we talk everything about technicality of the payments and credit and everything. But our philosophy is that all the Fintech business we have should be the back end of the society. In that context, I really would like to emphasize the importance of the communication platform. In Japan, we are entering into mobile operator business, just like O2 or Telefonica here, and we are moving towards 5G, which would enable a lot of IoT devices to be able to make a payment. But 10 years later, we're going to move to 6G. 15 years later, we're going to move to 7G. So 25 years later, we're going to have a very, very different communication platform from what we have right now. And this enables, for example, transportation, which is a part of our daily life, but also other things are, very, very frictionless in terms of, transferring value from one place to the others, even without, without being aware of that. Security is very important, and also intelligence is important. But this communication platform would be ever important than before, ever more important than before, in the coming 25 years. And that's what we are, kind of betting on in
Building
Japan.
base.
Yes.
Thank you. So the last question for the three of you. If you would have an advice or a nugget of wisdom that the audience can take home with them, what would it be? If you look into the role of payments, fintech, in consumer ecosystem, what is key? What would be your advice to look into or to focus on? I see Laurent nodding. Can you start?
Please, okay. Wow, I would keep it to myself really if I had that wisdom really. But truly, what we are seeing for us is, yes, everybody, around the world solving the same problems of payments, making it invisible, frictionless. There's a lot of standard, etc. What we see is first is in most of the markets where we are, which is around 4 billion people, 2 in 3 transactions are not made with Visa and MasterCard. So if this is your mental frame, you've got to change it, because most of the most popular payment methods are actually outside of these rails. And that's UPI, and that's an Alipay, and that's a WeChat, etc. So there's a completely different world. out there. So if you want to build a new business, take this in mind. The second thing is payments with the drive for consolidation, for scale, the pressure also around all the margin, etc. Still an okay industry, right, if you want to allocate capital. But what we see actually is what is your bigger plan? Because everybody is busy building that, and then comes a big player on top, like a Google Pay, for instance, just to mention one, right? And say, hey, you're building the range, you're maintaining all the plumbing. Good. I'm going to sit on top, get all the information from the consumers, and that's my business. And the third one is fundamentally, we define ourselves like, yes, we have a payments business, that's our cash cow. This is the value just of generating transactional data that we use to do credit scoring, that you use to provide financial services to 500 million people who, by the way, are banked. Nobody should say, it's unbanked. They are banked, just that they don't use it, in the same way. But the whole game is around getting access to transactional data and other data. And it's fundamentally for us, that's the only wisdom, is what is truly your investment right now around AI, talent, skills, capabilities to mine this. And if you don't have really a clear plan around AI and how it is really driving your business, I think you're missing out. Because that's what we discuss in China and India. That's it.
Okay, Gilles?
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't know if it is piece of wisdom, but it is certainly a few thoughts. Actually, two, if you allow. The first one would be, it is a quote that I like. I think originally it was probably somewhere in Italian, but my Italian is pretty poor, so I will translate it in English. I think it is said that it was Michelangelo who said one day something like, the greatest danger for most of us is not that we aim too high and we miss our target, is that we aim too low and we reach it. I think when we are thinking about ecosystem, I believe we should aim very high. And I have the genuine belief that payment will be there to support any type of ambition, because technologies these days, whether it is online, mobile, whether it is card or non-card based, we can accommodate any type of complexity of an ecosystem. We are ready for that, we're going to scale for that, and Laurent is right, beyond Europe it will be global, because this value proposition will be global for the big world-shaping consumer brands, that's for sure. My second piece is just connecting to a piece of thinking that is taking place these days in Europe. I've been mentioning that from an industrial consolidation standpoint, Europe is late, and we are going to catch up on that. Worldline will do it for sure. But there is a second domain where Europe is late. It is in the way we've been architecturing payment brand. There is a missing milestone in the European payment brand, that we don't have a European payment brand. And connecting that to the consumer ecosystem topic, I believe that I understand banks are these days starting to work around, should we have a type of European payment brand initiative, like India is having, like China is having, like Russia is having, like of course the US is having forever. I think if they were, and if we were collectively to work on that, we would think, what should be the new payment brand that is particularly well suited to support consumer ecosystem, that is allowing complex interaction between participants behind one single transaction? What should be the rule of this scheme to make that simple, transparent, efficient, and as cheap as possible? It could be good sometime to be late.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely aiming high, this European payment brand, but it's a good aim. Toby, last piece of advice.
Okay, yeah, well, just one quick comment. I think we need to really think about where the innovation lies. Where is the innovation? Would that be coming from tech? Would that be coming from the combination of the application of the services? Because at the end of the day, well, for example, ride-hailing services, it's a combination of existing technologies. Nothing is new, but the combination was very sort of disruptive, yeah, in order to make people's life better. And I think that's where we have a sort of we see a golden village. So I think it's really, well, maybe again we talked too much about tech, tech part or tech part or whatever, but I think it's really important to really, it's really important to identify where the innovation in this room is coming from, and and then take it from there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the excellent panelists today. A warm applause.